Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of Skinwalker stories for you to sink your ears into as part 4 of Nature Week. Be sure to join me in the next 2 days for even more thrilling stories. But for now it's time to get comfortable, subscribe and let the darkness take control. I need to explain 2 things before I share this story. I have a sleep disorder that I've had my whole life. I sleepwalk. Nothing dramatic, mostly just do everyday things while sleeping. Open the fridge, put clothes in the washer without starting it, take the vacuum out of the closet and set it in the middle of the room and leave. That sort of thing. When I was younger, this was a nightly occurrence, but now that I'm in my late 30s, it's just once or twice a year. I am native. I have a healthy respect for the spirits and stories that my ancestors told. Many hunting trips I would sit around the fire with my dad, listening to him tell stories of the tricks Wendigo play to try and lure you to them. While I'm unsure if I believe the stories of Skinwalkers and Wendigos, I don't tend to mess around, just in case. Shoot roughly 3 weeks ago. My husband and I both work construction. We have hard, long, and rewarding days. Once dinner is over and planning for the next day's complete, the dogs have to be taken out for the last time. Our heads hit the pillows and it's lights out until the alarm sounds. We sleep like we're dead. Pretty sure a war could break out in our bedroom, thundering tanks and all, and we'd sleep right through it, wondering in the morning where all the holes in the wall came from. Our bedroom is a fairly good size and has a small bay window in the corner. My husband likes to sleep with fresh air, so he takes the window side of the bed. This particular night though, something woke me up. I never wake up. The dogs were quiet. Typically, northwestern weather, rain quietly tapping away, no thunder, no heavy wind. I looked the dark and quiet room over, and nothing was out of place. The only noise beside the rain was my husband's box fan gently humming away. I was confused, but decided to adjust my blankets, flip my pillow, and go back to sleep. As I closed my eyes and took a deep breath to relax, I heard my husband. Babe, come out here and give me a hand with the boys." Confused and still foggy from being awoken from a deep sleep a few seconds earlier, I opened my eyes to the pitch darkness of the room again. Rarely one of our 3 dogs will need to go out in the night, and if it goes, they all go. We live in an incredibly rural area, and it's easy for them to get lost in the dark woods. Not a good thing when you have bears, coyotes, cougars, and whatever else on your property. Babe, can you just come and help me with the boys?" he called again, the voice right against the half-open window, not concerned, just demanding. Annoyed and groggy, I leaned up, propped myself up on a stiff pile of blankets and looked at the window. It was too dark to see him. The floodlight was on the other side of the house. "Babe, come outside," my husband demanded. It was the third beckon that bothered me. He was never that pushy. If something was wrong, or one of the dogs wandered off, he wouldn't say that. It happened before. He would say something like, "Come and watch these 2 real quick, I can't find Murph," or something like that. Something wasn't right. I was regaining my focus and shaking off the sleepies. Quite awake at this point, I knew it wasn't him. My husband has a very distinct voice. He's a Sicilian from Queens and has a very deep, unintentionally loud voice. It was at that moment, staring out the black window, I realized I wasn't leaning on a pile of blankets. The pile of blankets were breathing. I was leaning on my sleeping husband, listening to him call me from outside the window. "Babe, come outside." The voice came again from the window. I put my hand down on my husband's face. He was there, asleep next to me. But his voice, or what I thought was him, was at the window. I laid down next to him, very, very close to him, and closed my eyes tightly. In moments like this, I'm the type to try and pretend it is not happening. I didn't hear it again, and spent the next half of the night trying to fight off the spookies, and had at some point finally fell asleep. I told my husband about it the next morning after his "Oh my god, you look like death" comment. I hadn't slept well. He laughed it off, as I had probably just had a creepy sleepwalking thing. Thing is, whenever I have a sleepwalking event, I remember nothing. I don't recall dreaming, waking, or anything else from those nights. No matter how hard I try, it's like a blackout. I'm sure I was awake for this. Every time I think of it in the past few weeks, I remember those hunting trips, poking coals around the fire with a stick, while my dad tells his serious yet animated tales of Wendigo tricks trying to get you out to them. I know it sounds crazy, but I think there might be a Wendigo in my woods. I lived in a house in the middle of the woods. My only neighbors were just down the hill from us, and they were an elderly couple. The other neighbor was a few miles away from my house, and located deep inside the woods behind my house. I have always felt creeped out by the nighttime at that trailer home, but this story takes place in the middle of the day, which makes it even stranger. My son was about 7 months old, and needed to get some outside time to smell the clean air and get some sunshine. It was just me and my son that day. Everyone else was working. He and I got comfy and took a seat on the porch stairs and adjusted to the 1 p.m. late spring/early summer sun. I was holding him in my lap, playing with him and showing him all of the greenery around us. We were out there for about 8 minutes when I heard a child's agonizing scream echo out from the forest behind my house. I stayed absolutely quiet and stood up quickly to see if my neighbor's grandchildren had come to visit them. But my neighbors weren't even home. Just as I was to go back inside the house, I heard a little girl scream out, "Help me." Completely freaked out, I called my sister to get her advice on what I should do before calling 911. Luckily, she answered quick, and with my baby in one arm and the phone in the other, I told my sister about the screams. I know we have neighbors in the woods a few miles from the house, but why the hell would there be a child all alone in the woods screaming like that? That's pretty far away from their place to be messing around with me over here. She was weirded out, but didn't really freak out like I did. As I was on the phone with her asking her what to do, I heard children laughing loudly in the woods. 2 or 3 children this time, and it sounded closer, much closer, like they were in the tree line where the forest begins. I asked my sister if she heard it, but she hadn't. I asked her one more time if I should call the cops, and she told me to go inside and if I heard weird stuff again to call the police. I hang up and send a voice message to my best friend. She answers me back, telling me the exact same thing. Go inside and stay there. Don't come out. Something is trying to lure you in there. I stupidly stay and take videos, sending them to my friend, telling her where I heard the screams and laughter. And that's when a large hawk comes out the tree line and makes its way to a large oak in front of my house. It sits on a large tree branch and stares at me. I took a video of the hawk and sent it to my friend. She then sent a voice message and tells me that her boyfriend wanted me and my son to go inside. My friend's boyfriend was indigenous and knew exactly what was going on. After this hawk stares me down for 5 minutes, it flies over my house and vanishes. I go inside and stay there for the remainder of the day, completely freaked out by the whole thing and in disbelief. I don't believe in skinwalkers, but I know that it couldn't have been children. Why would a child or children be playing that deep in the woods? And how did they know we were there? Were they watching us? I forgot to mention, a week and a half after the strange event, my friend told me that her boyfriend's father had heard that there had been sightings of skinwalkers on the reservation, multiple accounts. She told me to never whistle at night and ignore any strange activity in the woods in future, and never to say the word out loud, because they'll know and they'll come for you. I live in upstate New York. I have always had experiences growing up in this house. Maybe more stories to come, but anyway, it was late at night, close to 1 a.m. when this occurred. I have a window at the end of my bed that has an AC in it. It's about 8 feet from my window to the grass below. My cat, Hudson, loves to jump on the open window and lay across and press against the screen. This night he had decided to jump up on that window, and I had totally forgotten the screen to my window was out due to the AC. I didn't realize this until I heard Hudson hissing and screeching at something outside the window. I assumed it was some sort of animal, perhaps a raccoon, and tried to call him in. Suddenly he had fallen out the window and started screeching. I have never heard him make a sound like this before, and jump out of bed and go outside to get him. I went to my brother's room to have him help me go find my cat. I was really nervous because he's gotten out before and has been missing for days on end. So my fear of the dark was thrown out the window. In this moment, I had my flashlight on and sprinted out the door and went to the side of the house where my window was. I made the turn and shined the flashlight on the area. But what I saw was not a cat, but a 7 to 8 foot figure trying to scale the wall of my house and reach to my open window. One of the creature's back legs were pressed against the house, while the front legs had a hold on my windowsill. The creature noticed my flashlight and looked in my direction. It had deep, red eyes that kept me rooted to the spot. The creature stared me in the eyes and proceeded to let go of the house and move towards the field on the side, but it didn't go on all fours. Whatever this thing was stood on its back legs and ran quickly into the darkness. I was able to make out what looked like a set of horns or antlers on its head. The height on its back legs was at least 7 to 8 feet tall, and it did not look at all human. Its posture was slightly hunched over, its arms swayed to the side as it moved. They hung close to the level of what I guess would be its knees. My little brother was in the front of the house looking for my cat, so I went to grab him to help me look in the field for the creature. At that point, I think my adrenaline was going fast, because I didn't completely process what I had seen. We got close to the field and saw absolutely nothing. No cat, no creature, and we made our way back to the front to look for the cat on the other side of the house. Without saying anything, my brother and I froze. We both looked towards the tree and bushes at the side of the house and saw them rustling. We heard this painfully loud shrieking and we booked it to the front door. I have no idea if what we heard was a creature or an animal, but I had an awful gut feeling standing in the driveway. It wasn't safe, and I wouldn't have my brother out there. I locked the door quickly and went to the back porch sliding door and saw my cat waiting at the door to be let in. He is the type to escape and be out for days with no issue. He had never once just come to the back door after getting out. He looked afraid. His tail was the bushiest I've ever seen, and the poor thing was shaking. He ran inside and stayed away from the windows and doors the rest of the night. I have only told this story in so much detail to my boyfriend, and even then it's hard to explain what I had seen, heard, and felt that night. The gut feeling was something that is not right, and we could be in serious danger, and it was nothing I'd felt before until that night. The most memorable part of that experience was the feeling I got when the creature stared into my soul with those deep red eyes. I have nightmares about that very event, and I see its eyes often when I close mine. It took me so long to process and analyze what I had seen, but the closest I can describe this creature to is a Wendigo. But I live fairly close to so-called Wendigo territory in New York. The whole experience freaks me out thinking about it, and I thought I'd finally share with you guys. I was traveling from Arizona to Durango, Colorado, and about midnight I was very tired, so I pulled over just outside of Shiprock, New Mexico, on the Navajo reservation to get some sleep. About an hour later, I woke up from a nightmare of evil faces and bright colors coming at me from all directions. I started my car and turned on the headlight. 10 feet in front of me was a coyote, and a jackrabbit sitting there staring at me. Needless to say, I got the heck out of there. A few years later, I was dating a Navajo girl, and when I told her about my experience, she became visibly upset and told me to never mention it again. I think we know what she might have been alluding to. My boyfriend and I get off work at around 10, and at 10:30 we grocery shop at work. It doesn't close till midnight, and then we were heading home, and we take the cuts. On our way home, we saw a slender but muscular person running naked across the road like an animal on all fours. The more we stared, the less human it looked. Muscular thin legs and hair and fur running down its butt down to the calves. It was a curve next to a canal, so as we turned to see it and our light beam shined on it, and my light shined on the orchard it ran into, those trees were leafless and fairly apart, so we were able to see how it ran into the trees. My boyfriend and I saw it and both agreed it was no human nor monkey, just some wacky looking creature. I recently told my friend, and she told me it was a Wendigo. We lived in Central Valley, California, and it's one of the strangest things I've ever seen. My girlfriend and I were vacationing in Joshua Tree. Before we left, I jokingly told her, "Whatever you do when we get there, don't talk about skinwalkers. Talking about them gives them power, and I'd rather not risk us getting eaten by cryptids." We both laughed about it and continued packing for the trip. The place we were staying was a remote cabin in the middle of the desert, and when I say remote I mean it. No other houses around for at least a mile, and a perfectly dark night sky. One night, we decided to make a campfire, have some drinks and make some s'mores. It's pretty quiet around us. All we can hear is the wind howling across the plains and the crackle of the fire. My girlfriend gets a devilish look in her eye and says, "So, tell me about the legend of Skinwalker." I crap you not. The moment she finished her sentence, a pack of coyotes began howling in the distance. It wasn't a normal howl either. It sounded painful, like they were mourning some sort of great loss. Suffice to say, we got out of there real quick, extinguished the campfire, and ran back to the cabin. I don't think either of us slept that night, being constantly kept up by the creaks and groans of the cabin. Late fall in 2010, in northern Canada, I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the most of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone bedded down for the night, I decided to grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of the reach of the light from the campfire. Out from the tree line about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I felt kind of funny, lightheaded, and could smell this putrid stink, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly, and begin to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness along the tree line, and I could hear this voice coming from there. "Hello, I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit, but stopped to analyze the situation. My relatives' faces stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it all, so I started to back away and make my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice, and I was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry and began to shout to me, "Come here." so I turned to run away, but as I looked back one more time, I saw the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes, and a hollow chest cavity. This creature was super thin, and I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the riverbank, and I could hear the heavy breaths and stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the riverbank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass trying to lift myself and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally my voice came back and I yelled, "Someone has my leg!" My brother woke up and ran over to where I was and pulled me and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw and that it looked like my relative but wasn't. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, and my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too. I know." That solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared this story with anyone out of fear of being labelled as crazy or liars. I had nightmares and couldn't fall asleep for months after. I would see things in the dark constantly, or figures looking in my window, or hear whispers when I was home alone at night, or walking back. Eventually I was seeing dark figures daily. I went to medicine men/shaman for help, but I've learnt that ceremonies only relieve it temporarily. Friends gave me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I learned that it could only do this if it touches you, which it never did. Ever since that night I've been on edge when I enter a forest or wooded area, which sucks because I love being outdoors and hunting in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my guard up, keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Make your own conclusions about this. I've paid a price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They're real. At least, I attest to that. I was around 11 or 12 riding in the back of my friend's mum's SUV. We were visiting a friend of hers that had apparently lived deep in the woods of northern New Jersey. It was late at night, maybe 1 a.m., but the high beams of the vehicle were bright enough for me to make out either side of the road we were travelling on. I saw what I thought was an animal running awkwardly next to the car, which I thought was extremely odd considering I glanced at the speedometer and we were pushing 45. I was able to catch a clear view of it for a split second, and it looked like a human running on all fours. But one thing I remembered about it was how pale and grey the skin was. 1 second, it was on the right side of the vehicle, and then it seemed to have jumped over our car and vanished on the left side. To this day, I'm still confused about what it could have been. After some investigation, I did manage to find mention of a creature called a Skinwalker, and think that that is probably what it most closely resembles. But if it was that, or something else that I saw that night, I'll never be able to say with certainty. I'm a 25-year-old male. I live in Utah, and I'm curious to know if anyone here has seen what I believe I've seen. You see, this happened to me when I was 17 and in high school, and living with my parents. My house at the time was in a very small town. The backyard faced open, empty fields and mountains for miles before you reached another civilization at all. My best friend lived next door, and we shared this field as our backyard in a way. I have to explain that his house sat and was built on a different street that ended in the field with a small cul-de-sac. I think there were supposed to be more houses built down this street to expand the town, but they clearly never got around to it. So his driveway was basically this cul-de-sac, even though there were no other houses built there. This will matter later in the story. I used to stay the night at my friend's house a lot in high school, because I didn't have the best relationship with my parents. Every once in a while, we would wake up to hear dragging and a weird gargling sound from the back porch. His room was a basement room with the window well up to the back porch. It would happen maybe a few times a month, but whenever we would gather the courage to check, nothing would be back there. This happened for years. One night haunts my friend and I to this day. My friend was getting ready to move, and we would stay up all night playing games and watching movies. We decided to go on a music drive just to vibe. So we hopped into his truck with high beams and swung out of the driveway, turning them towards the field to use the roundabout. The light illuminated this thing. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. It was naked and on all fours, abnormally large, particularly its limbs that seemed to fold under itself in an unnatural way. Its pale skin clung to it like it had to be stretched out, but the part that sends shivers down my spine was its face. Its jaw hung open with this gaping maw, like a snake unhinging its jaw to eat. Its black eyes glistened in the light as it looked at us, but just as it turned to see us, it quickly scurried backwards, almost like it was on rewind into the brush of the field. My friend and I were pale as ghosts. We both looked at each other like, "Did you just see that too?" We were shaken. Let's just say we tried to have a good rest of the night, but we couldn't believe what we saw. We ended up just sitting there in his basement with guns ready and waiting to hear the gargling and dragging again, but we never did. I don't live in that town anymore. There are times when I visit, that empty field still feels like it's watching and waiting, even though I can't see it. Whatever it is in there, I think it's still out there. My family has lived in Iowa since July of 2017, and we live in a small neighborhood with about 25 houses and surrounded by forest. I've seen many horror movies, and most of the movies are usually in a forest, so my paranoia was already alarmed. A year into living in Iowa, our dog was getting really old, so we got another dog so our old dog had a friend. We name our new dog Tucker, and he is a very energetic dog, with everyone and everything. Our old dog died a few months later, and Tucker was the only interactive pet we had. A few years later, my mum and dad got divorced, and she moved on to a guy that lives a few miles from our house. My mum and dad settled on a schedule on what day they can spend with us, while the other goes somewhere else for a few days. For context, my mum's side is native, and we do believe in the lore of Skinwalkers and Wendigos. Well, one day, my mum's day, she drives us this road where it's surrounded by a bunch of trees and a couple of houses and 2 farms. There is a hill on this road, and she has to drive up, and as my mum drove up the hill, she saw something in the field near the neighborhood. What she saw was tall and grey-skinned, had deer hooves as feet, and it was walking in the woods. My mum was confused, and when she reached a stop sign, she looked back in her mirror and nothing. Now my mum was scared, because she remembered all of the stories of the Wendigo and drove off to our house. When she told me this, I was already scared because of the stories I heard on YouTube. As she told me, thoughts of skinwalkers flooded my mind. After this, I was extremely cautious when I was outside on my bike rides. Without thinking, I rode my bike near the hill when my mum saw the possible creature. I brought my camera to take pictures of the landscape because it was nice out, but my paranoia was going off when I was near the field. I always trust my paranoia. As I rode off, I felt like I was being watched when I rode past it. A few days later, it was nighttime, and my dog had gone outside to use the bathroom. I put my dog on a leash that is connected to the porch and let Tucker out. I turned on the light that was outside so that I could see what Tucker was doing, but I was cooking food in the kitchen for me, so I had to focus on that. When my food was finished, I heard my dog start barking at something, so I walked towards the door so that I could see what he was doing. Tucker was barking at something in the dark. I opened the door and told Tucker to stop barking and get inside because his business was done and his barking could wake up the neighbors. After telling him to get inside, he kept barking at something in the darkness. My paranoia kicked in and I shouted at him to get inside, but he kept barking. I started to get scared when I finally looked into the darkness to see nothing but eyes shining from the porch light. As I saw those eyes, an instinct kicked in to pull on the leash and scream, "Get inside!" Finally, Tucker responds by reacting to the pull of the leash and running towards the door, and I slammed the door as soon as he was inside. I turned the porch light off and took the leash off his collar, locked every single door and window in the house, and covered every window and anything you can look through. After Tucker was off the leash, he ran downstairs into our basement, so I grabbed my food and went downstairs to keep an eye on the dog. It's been 2 months since then, and my routine when it's gotten dark was what I did when I saw those eyes outside. Like close the blinds, lock the doors, turn the lights off from outside. Now when I'm outside, I need a group of people or a weapon on me just to feel safe. I'm unsure what it is, but any help would be appreciated. For some background, I come from a very religious and strict household. My parents were never keen on me doing anything much outside of home, especially not having boyfriends. But when I turned 16, I started to become rebellious and decided to take matters into my own hands. There was this guy called Chet that I really liked at school, and he one day asked me out. But I had to tell him no because of my parents' beliefs. As the weeks went by, my desire to be with Chet was outweighing my love of their religious regime, and before long, he and I were making out behind the bike sheds of our school. For most people, this probably wasn't a big deal, but for me at the time, it was the most rebellious thing I had ever done, and he and I officially got together. But things started escalating in a way that I could not expect when he asked me to go camping with him. He said there was a really nice spot deep in the forest, and I was very excited for this. We'd been together a few weeks at this point, and deep down, I wondered and secretly hoped that we would get up to a bit more than just camping. So there we were, the idea firmly ingrained in my mind, and I couldn't wait to try and get it done. But convincing my parents, regardless of how I worded it or lied about it, as they had no idea of his existence. A few months passed and we were still together. The dream of the camping trip still on our minds, and it was one of these rare evenings where my parents told me that they had to go see a relative, and being the age I was, asked if I wanted to come or not. Now, the relatives in question lived about 3 hours away, and generally speaking, although they never said this at the time, they'd stay the night, but only make that decision on the spot when they got there or when they wanted to leave. I was going to be left home alone, something that hadn't happened to me in a really long time, and the thought of the camping trip sprung to the forefront of my mind. My imagination was sizzling with all the things that I would get to do without my parents here, and I told them, wistfully, how much I would love to have gone, but that I really had to get some work done with my school stuff as I was preparing early. They left, gleeful of their devout daughter trying to get her schoolwork done before it even began. And off they went, with my 2 siblings, and I was home alone. As you can imagine, the first thing I did was tell Chet to see if he was free. We kept in regular correspondence, and I knew that that day he was up to, as he says, not much. He was delighted with the idea. He had a truck and was going to come pick me up in about an hour, and we were going to make our way. It was still early in the afternoon, and we could have a really nice night. I just had to be sure I was home by like 9 AM or something, so that my parents wouldn't catch on I hadn't been home. Anyway, we left the area in Chet's truck, and he told me about this camping spot that was only about half hour from where we lived. You see, we lived relatively rural already, in the outskirts of a small city, so once you leave, you're already in the middle of nowhere. We get to these woods, and he unpacks the tent. I had already packed a few supplies in my little backpack, and we hold hands as we walk through this trail. It was a surreal experience for me. I don't know if any of you have ever had really strict upbringings, but I'm sure that if you did, your first real taste of freedom is something that you truly cherish. Walking through those woods was beyond words happiness. As we made it to an area that he said would be a good campsite, I wouldn't know as I'd never been before, we sat down and he told me that we should think about making a fire, but the first we could eat. Being young, we didn't pack any real food and mostly just bought junk food. He also bought some vodka, which he was very excited to share. Now, I'd never been allowed to drink, so I was extremely nervous about trying it. But temptation was definitely fueling my desire more than my trepidation, and I had 1, then 2, then 3 shots. We were both sufficiently buzzed, built the tent, hung out in the tent a little while, and before long I was getting pretty tired. Darkness had well and truly taken control of the sky, and the stars were just coming out. You could still see the orange haze in the distance from our city, but for the most part, if you looked the other way, you could see nothing but a thick blanket of stars just starting to pop up. Chet said that he needed to go back to his truck because he forgot his phone, and he needed to tell his mum that he'd got here okay. I said fine. The walk hadn't taken all that long, maybe half an hour. So, I, buzzed and feeling really good with myself, was lying there in the tent, as I heard his footfalls get further and further away. The fire was also starting to dwindle a little, so I decided to rekindle it just a bit, didn't want to make it too big. I stepped out and saw the pitiful amount of branches left were really not enough to carry on with. So I looked around. I used my cell phone flashlight to illuminate the area so that I could try and find a few more branches or logs to add to the fire. The further I got away from our fire and the little clearing we were using, the darker it became. The sky only illuminating a small portion of the area I was occupying. As I headed further into the woods, I heard something in the distance, a rustling. It was in the general direction I thought he'd gone anyway, so I was pretty sure he'd just either come back a little earlier, maybe he forgot something, I don't know, a flashlight perhaps? But I tried not to dwell on it. I smiled and looked up, but couldn't see anything. No figure, no nothing. I shined it in the general direction, but couldn't see anything still. So I put my phone flashlight down and decided to just say it was an animal. I found a few more logs and made my way back to the fire. There had been a decently sized amount in the area I had just been in, and thought that I'd go get the remaining few in a moment once I'd stoked the fire, which I did. I make my way back to collect the remaining sticks when all of a sudden I didn't realize that there had been a small incline, and my shoe slips in the mud. The moment my shoe slips, I topple forward, and because of this incline, I fall even further and really hurt my leg as I hit the ground with a solid thump. It was a sudden drop after that incline of a couple of feet. It was enough to seriously knock the wind out of me and startle me substantially. I lie there in pain, my phone flung from my hand, and who knows where. I couldn't see the light anymore. So here I was in the dark, not knowing where I was and trying to make my way out. I gingerly try and extend my leg, but the pain was intense, so I decided to just wait a little bit. I knew Chet would be a while still, so there was no point yelling, and I wasn't that far from the campfire anyway. Not that I could see the fire from my vantage point, but nonetheless knew he would probably come calling for me and not to worry too much. I was mostly just bored and in pain. That's when I think maybe I can use my hands to help me get up. But I was just getting dirtier, with mud going all over my hands, which I really didn't want. So I sat there on my butt, hugging my hurting knee. After about a minute, or maybe 5, it was hard to tell in that moment, I hear movement again. Optimistic, I shout out that I'm here and that I'd fallen down getting logs and to be careful. He doesn't say anything, which is odd, but I hear movement approaching me. Just as I hear the movement, I hear him call out to me, "Hey, Steph, where are you?" "I'm down here. I fell." "Where are you, Steph?" That was what I just told him. Follow my voice." "Steph, where are you, Steph?" That was strange. He'd said the same thing 3 times. It's almost like he couldn't hear me. At this point, I was starting to get more annoyed than anything. I said I'm right here, but once again he parrots the same line. The strange thing is the tone was also the same. That's when my heart dropped an octave. I was starting to get pretty creeped out, and decided that maybe it would be best to really try and make an effort to make my own way instead of wait for my boyfriend to rescue me romantically. So I push myself up, and I hear the rustling continue, approaching closer and closer. What the hell was going on here? I was starting to get frightened, but at this point was still convinced that he was just around the tree. So I push myself up, and just as I poke my head over the drop, using my hands and my good leg to push me up, do I see not my boyfriend, but a thing, the likes of which I still trouble to comprehend. This creature was tall and raggedy looking, skin grey, with eyes that were red. In the dim light, I managed to make out this figure, and as I looked at him, I think I crapped myself. Fear flooded my body, and I had no idea what to do. I didn't even know what it was. I just knew that it was bad. I couldn't run, I couldn't do anything. It locked eyes with me for what felt like an eternity, and a few moments later, I heard a rustling behind the creature. The creature did not move, did not even blink. That's when I realized it was Chet. I shouted his name so loud I think even the creature was startled, and within a second, it ran off into the distance. I wasn't sure if it was a hallucination, or if I'd even seen that, or if it were real. I had so many questions, but as Chet approached me and pulled me up and started talking and asking how I'd been and how I'd got there, I just burst into tears. Of course, he didn't believe me. He was actually angry and thought I'd made up an excuse to go home early. As you can imagine, the rest of that evening didn't go down so great, and in the morning after he dropped me off, we didn't speak much for the rest of the summer, and broke up shortly after. But that creature haunts my dreams far more than the breakup with Chet, and I wonder deep down what would have happened to me, injured as I was, if he hadn't have shown up when he did to save me from that thing, and whatever the hell it was. Any insight would be greatly appreciated, as it's left me stumped for the better part of half my life. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's collection of stories. A real creepy collection, am I right? If you did, be sure to let me know in the usual way. And I would like to extend a huge thank you to everyone who has been watching Nature Week. It really thrills me to see you guys enjoying it, to see listeners who haven't been back in a while, and some new listeners, check out the channel and the content, and I really hope you guys are liking it. But that's all I've got time for you for today, A huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names are on screen. And until tomorrow, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.